This is Ryan from Behind Zion Curtain. It's been several years since I made a video for Behind Zion Curtain. Check us out at BehindZionCurtain.com if you want to see the 15-year history of our blog now. Well, 16 years. I started it in 1999. I think it was August of 1999. So Behind Zion Curtain has went through many phases. For a while, we didn't have hosting. We didn't have our website up. So there's a link to our archive.org site, or our archive.org archives, and you can go there and see, what has changed over the years. I wrote my biography in 1999. It was basically why I got the domain. I put that out there. Since then, over 3 million people have seen my biography. I put that out there just like I put tattoos on my body when I was a young kid. When I was a young kid, my parents were very phony. Both of them partied. When my parents got together, my dad was much older than my mother. I think 14 years older than my mother. My mother wasn't even an adult. She was 17 in 1975 when they got together. When they got married in November of 1977, I was already 6 months old. I was born in March of 1977. But, over the years, they really tried to portray a Mormon lifestyle, and my mom was a primary class teacher for this LDS church on Sunday. She'd take a break, go have a smoke, and come back and, pretend like everything was on the up and up, like there was no addiction or issues or anything. And it was a really well-guarded secret. Not a lot of people knew that my parents smoked and drank. My dad went to jail many times for car accidents and stuff involving alcohol. And this is kind of what irritated me, is that, I started kind of getting into the party lifestyle at a young age. My friends in the neighborhood were all a little older than me. They had the long hair, when we lived in Sandy, Utah. I was like 8 years old. And they grew their hair long and had earrings, and they listened to Ozzy and AC/DC and Cinderella, and so did I. My parents really, my dad especially, my mom wasn't as concerned. My dad really wanted me to be the ideal LDS boy, play sports, have a short haircut, read the Book of Mormon, obey Grandpa's rules. Grandpa was fiercely into the Mormon church, was a temple worker. We come from a seventh generation family of Mormons, from when my great-great-grandfather William Theodore Thompson came over from the UK in the 1850s and started helping the church establish their presence here. So it was a very long-standing tradition in my family to be LDS, and that's what my dad wanted of me. He was more of a rebel than I was in a lot of ways. Even having a family, continued to drink and continued to party and continued to carry on a reckless lifestyle. Something I gave up a long time ago, way before I had a family. Haven't been arrested since I've had a family, haven't went to jail, haven't, whatever. So, I've really tried to straighten out my act for my family, and, that was one thing that he didn't do while I was a kid. He stopped drinking when I was about 16, so my younger siblings didn't really experience it as much as I did. But his previous family, he had 5 children from his previous family, they all basically say they went through the same things as I did. So it's not like I'm the only one. A lot of accusations were made about my father when he was dying that I never heard before, because I was prevented from seeing my half-siblings my entire life. Venomously, separated from them in my life by my parents, and I always wanted a relationship with them, but was prevented from having such. But anyway, the problem is the persecution I went through when I'd grow my hair long, like my rock star idols, my mentors, and my friends in the neighborhood. My dad would call me a pussy, a faggot, a little girl, just really get on my case about it, hoping to chide me into being more like he wanted me to be. And that just made me go the other direction. The more he chided me, the more I rebelled, to a point where we got in fist fights and stuff. And then my parents separated when I was 12. My mom went to live with my grandma. My dad went to live in a trailer park. I stayed with my grandma. My mom moved back in with my father. I stayed behind and went to school in Payson, Utah, where my grandma lived, and lived with her. And then my parents later forced me to come back and live with them, to babysit, basically. I babysat off and on from the time I was 8 years old. I was always told I was a horrible babysitter, that I was mean, and my siblings hated me, and whatever, blah, blah, blah. I was just a terrible babysitter. But they forced me to babysit anyway. So even if I was that terrible, I think they were culpable for my, interaction with my siblings. I mean, if you've got a horrible, terrible babysitter who is apparently abusing your children, like they say I was, and you make them babysit and you continue to force them into that role of babysitter, it's more of the parent's responsibility than it is, the subordinate teenager or subordinate preteen as it was. But anyway, that was the case for me, and I desperately all my life tried to get away from their house. Like I said, when my mom moved it back in with my dad, it took me 2 more years for them to come with the police and force me back into their house. And they even put me in an inpatient rehab to, separate me from my grandmother. And they put me in this 30-day thing, this little program. And then when I left, I had to go move in with my parents at their crappy trailer park house in Provo, Utah. But if they hadn't had gone out of their way to make me feel ashamed of being who I was, then I wouldn't have rebelled or have, mentioned their past or their, faults to them at all. Because, we all make mistakes, and I was going through my mistakes. I was going through my learning experience. But they were doing the same things as I was doing when I was doing those things, but I was the one that was being held to a higher standard. Like I had to be better than they were. Do as I say, not as I do. And so this whole thing of lying for the Lord, presenting a false image to people, Joseph Smith did it, John Taylor did it, Lorenzo Snow did it, especially with polygamy. They all denied polygamy, in one context or another. Joseph Smith, while he was running for president in 1842, was asked many times about the polygamy thing. And, he finally got up in one speech and he says, "People accuse me of having 7 wives when I can only see one. I only have one wife." I mean, this was a famous speech of his. At the time, he had actually over 20 wives. Some of them were 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. But he was denying having more than just Emma Smith as his wife. He had consummated marriage, it is said to be, with 22 wives, and then he had been sealed to more than that, like 30 total women that he was sealed to. Not all of them he consummated marriage with, but the 14-year-old and the 12-year-old he did consummate marriage with. The 16-year-old Helen Mar Smith or Helen Mar, I forget her maiden name. Anyway, but yeah, just a dirty thing that they hid and they lied about. And that was the thing that pissed me off, is that my parents were just as faulty as me, just as sinful as I was, just as indulging as I was, but I was held to a higher standard while they told me how horrible I was. And then if I brought it up that they were doing things that were maybe not as presentable or as religiously acceptable in the community, that they hid, that very few people knew about, the drinking and the gambling and even the smoking. I mean, they were very careful to not smoke around people. They smoked around us all day, no problem, secondhand smoke, whatever. In public, not so much. And this lying for the Lord thing is kind of what inspired me as a kid to really, rebel and stand out. And I put tattoos all over my body. I put my hair in a mohawk, stood it up real high sometimes. I dyed it blue, put a big spider tattoo on the side of my head. By the time I was 15, I had all this, and tattoos that I'd put all over my body, just really crappy chicken scratch tattoos. And my cousin had dated a skinhead guy, or he wasn't really a skinhead guy. He had like one friend that was a skinhead, this guy Steve we knew. So it was like there's 3 of us, and we sat around and we drank and we smoked pot and we talked shit amongst each other. It wasn't like we were a gang of violent skinheads that committed crimes. We were just a bunch of shit-talking teenagers. Shaved our head, listened to a band called Minor Threat. Still love Minor Threat. They were called skinheads, but they were just punkers, really, in my opinion, hardcore punkers. And I still love them. I'm still not ashamed of it. That was my handle on the bulletin board systems when I was like 13 and 14 and 15. I used to go by Minor Threat or MT. And they had one song called Guilty of Being White. And I remember being so, transformed by that song, about all the reverse racism in this country. And this was the time in 1992 that Randy Weaver's family was slaughtered on Ruby Ridge up in Idaho. They shot young Sammy Weaver in the back on his property when they illegally invaded, the BTAF went up there and trespassed on Randy Weaver's property over a stupid bench warrant, his first ever crime that he wasn't really even guilty of. He was exonerated of it later. And they associated him with the Aryan nations because the Aryan nations lived next door to him. But, you know, he was just a former colonel of the military. He wasn't a racist, wasn't a skinhead, wasn't an Aryan nations. He just was their neighbor. And they wanted him to snitch on these guys. They wanted him to be an informant and infiltrate the skinheads or the Aryan nations. And he refused. He just was like, no, I'm done. I don't want any part of it. And so they tried to entrap him on weapons charges. He gave him a sawed-off shotgun or something after 2 years of them begging for it. Gave him a sawed-off shotgun that was like a half an inch too short. Came up after he missed court, executed his family, shot his son in the back with a MP5 machine gun, sniped his wife while she was in the doorway of their house holding a baby, like a newborn baby. I think she was like 6 months old. And Vicky Weaver didn't even have a weapon. They sniped her, shot her right between the eyes, shot Randy Weaver in the shoulder, shot their friend Kevin Harris in the shoulder, just murdered this family for no good reason. And that kind of made me lash out, and you read about it in Job chapter 1, verse 20, the renting of the clothes, the shaving of the head, putting ash on your face, just to, display lamentation or remorse or sadness. And that was basically where I was going with it. I mean, I had this, these locks that the girls loved, all these, this long hair. You can see it. I'll show you a picture. And I was this, this guy who, was a skater, a punker, kind of a rebel. But I wasn't a racist. I had, girlfriends that were Navajo. I had girlfriends that were Polynesian, Hawaiian, and friends of all races. My friend Jason McElprang, we were always together. I've got lots of pictures of him. He was a Hawaiian kid. He wore his Doc Martens, shaved his head, but he was Hawaiian. He wasn't even a white guy. Lots of different friends of mine that were different races. The girl that I dated when I was 15 taught me how to drive stick. She was full-blooded Navajo, dark skin. Her name was April Fuller. We just had, I had a lot of friends, but I, gotten so upset about what happened to Randy Weaver's family that I put this. I'll show you these tattoos. It was like this. It was on my back. It was about in the same position. And it was the same thing as you'll find on the AC/DC album, which was my favorite band at the time. I loved AC/DC. And I got it covered up later. But now my family to attack me because we've had a great divide in our family and I separated from them. And now they're like, oh, well, the reason is we hate him because he was a skinhead and he was a racist and he had all these Nazi tattoos on him. And they claim I had a swastika on me. Now, I leave that up for them to prove because they're making the accusation. I deny it. I never had a swastika, but they say I did. So my challenge to them, since the burden of proof is on the accuser, not the accused, if they're going to accuse me, they better be able to prove it. I said, to anyone who knows me, Ryan Richard Thompson from Springville, Utah, if you have pictures of me with skinhead tattoos or racist tattoos, or if you ever knew me to be a racist or a skinhead, please post your evidence somewhere, like YouTube or something, and then send them to me. I will post it on my website so that people can be exposed to this horrible person I once was. My challenge is to prove that there is no one person in this world who has pictures of me with tattoos of some racist symbols or lingo on my body. Some of my family claims that when I was a kid I had racist tattoos on me, and I was into some skinhead gang. But my rebuttal is that when I was a kid, I knew two guys who were friends of the family who claimed to be skinheads. I hung out with them, and I claimed to be a skinhead too. But it was such a brief part of my life from the age of 13 to age 15, and that was over in the blink of an eye, some 25 years ago. But I dispute that I once had racist tattoos and then got them removed. I reject that claim, and I would love for someone to provide proof of this bullshit story. I got tattoos removed when I was age 17 because they were done in poor quality and made me look trashy. I put most of my tattoos on me from the age of 12 to the age of 15, and I had a few friends put tattoos on me. But I reject the notions that these tattoos were racist. I wrote about it here. So, I mean, unless you're going to consider this AC/DC lightning bolt racist, and they say, that's the SS symbol from the Nazi Gestapo. Yeah, I mean, I can see where they might, get that idea. For me, I mean, long before I even knew what a skinhead was, I was a big fan of AC/DC. So when I got that tattoo on my back, for me, and I had these earrings in my ear of lightning bolts too. I had one on each ear of a lightning bolt. And when I got that tattoo on my back, I was with my cousin's boyfriend. We both went to the tattoo shop together, and I provided his ID as my ID because he was older than me by a couple years. So I was 15 when I got this, and I got it covered up with a sun when I was 18. And it was just because it was, it kind of did look like a skinhead tattoo, and I didn't want to be associated with that. I had gotten these tattoos on my chest and my foot when I was 17 and 18. I got this one from a professional tattoo shop. You can kind of see where it says SPEAR, which means Skins and Punks Everywhere Against Racism, which is a skinhead group that I started to oppose racism. So nobody else had that tattoo or that brand before I started it, and I started that back in 94 when I was 17. And then I got one on my foot that I did myself when I was 17. So I got this one when I was 18 at a professional tattoo shop on my chest. And then I got one just like it when I was 17, the year before, that I did myself. And I've opposed racism, very strongly ever since. I only hung out with 2 people who considered themselves skinheads, both of which had a swastika tattooed on them. But they were friends of my cousin, and then my cousin later married one of them. And I lived with her, when I was not getting along with my family. But now my family uses it against me. I've heard my sister use this, and I've heard my cousin who's gay use this. Oh, you were this horrible person, this racist guy, you were so mean and so cruel. I never got arrested for hurting anybody. I never got, any charges for any mischief related to that, skinhead thing. I never attacked anybody. I never fought anybody. I never defamed anybody. I never cursed anybody out, or I never said racist things to somebody of another color. I was just pissed off basically about what happened to Randy Weaver's family, and I was pissed off about the reverse racism, affirmative action, other things that were going on that disparaged white people or left them out of the picture and promoted other races above and beyond the white people. And then when things like that happened, like Randy Weaver, it was the same year that the LA riots broke out over Rodney King, who was this big cokehead that was cruising through residential streets at 80 miles an hour and got beat up by the cops. That was horrible. But what happened afterwards was twice as bad, where they burnt down the city of, South Central LA, Compton and whatnot. Well, what happened to Randy Weaver's family? This guy's a patriot. This guy's never been in trouble in his life. This guy was a colonel in the military. This guy, was raising his family on the outskirts of town, trying to stay away from society. And they came to him. The government came to him to try to make him an informant, and he rejected them. And, they didn't like that, so they attacked his family. They shot his wife in the forehead, sniped her in her own house while she's holding a baby, shot his son in the back, killed him, 14 years old, my age at the time, in 1992. I was 14 as well. And so, well, I guess I was probably like 13, but, it was about the same age range as me. And it was a terrible time in history. So I basically lamented, like Job, in Job chapter 1, verse 20. I shaved my head, I tattooed myself, I showed the pain and misery that I had inside to the world, and I didn't want to keep it inside and pretend that I was somebody that I wasn't. I wanted to show those emotions. I wanted people to know what was going on inside. I didn't want to hide it, and so I expressed myself. Now they hold it against me like I was some sort of horrible person. Man, the only thing I ever wanted was to get away from those people. I tried my whole life. I lived with my grandma when I was able to, got away from them, insisted on living with my grandma. When they were trying to make me live at my parents' house, my parents forced me back into their house when I was 15 using police force. But I was trying to stay away from them. I was trying to stay at my grandma's house. And when I couldn't stay there, I tried to stay with my cousins. And when I couldn't stay there, I stayed with some friends. And when I couldn't stay there, I went and lived on the streets in Seattle. Did everything I could to stay away from them. They're always like, oh, he tried to force himself in our life, and he tried to be mean and cruel to us. And it's just like the LDS people, like the Danites. If you look up the Avenging Angels, the Danites, the way they disparaged their opposition, the way they used lies or murder to, kill apostates or to kill opposers, people that oppose the Mormon Church. They used very strong tactics, authorized by Brigham Young, authorized by the prophet. Not just some rebel group of Mormons. These were, the people at the top that were participating in this. Joseph Smith's family, Brigham Young's adopted son. All these people participated in this. You can even look it up. The Mountain Meadows Massacre. Top officials of the Mormon Church were involved in that massacre, and this is how they treated apostates or people who were, against what they believed in any way. And it still goes on today in a more subtle way. Like if you read about the September 6th, how dedicated Mormons, people that were lifelong members of the Mormon Church, tithe-paying members, that paid their tithes, that went to church every week, they were ostracized and excommunicated for writing a history that wasn't exactly how the Mormons wanted it to be presented. These were historians. These were well-accredited writers, people who had been writing their whole lives and been featured and awarded with prizes for their writing, and were well-established writers and journalists. And they wrote about a history that is more accurate than what the LDS Church presents, but they were ostracized for presenting it differently. And that's how I've been treated too. There's a book by Brad and Chris Morin, I believe it's called Suddenly Strangers. It almost illustrates my life to a T, except for they were good Mormons. I just never accepted it. So not only did I, get ostracized from my family, but I was already ostracized from the Mormon community because I just always rejected the Mormon Church. Always. I mean, that's why I had all those tattoos all over my body and, was expressing myself in such a way, partly to reject the Mormon society around me. So I didn't have a, connection before I got my name removed from the Mormon records and opposed the Mormon Church very strongly on my blog. So after I did that, after I started making Behind Zion Curtain and Utah Pirate Radio, man, did I get ostracized and pushed out, and they lie on me and they tell everybody I was this horrible racist Nazi and all this. Well, prove it, prove it. Show me those pictures of these. They say I had swastikas tattooed on me. I never had a swastika. Show me the pictures. I grew up with these people. I spent years, traveling with my cousin, my gay cousin. We went to Las Vegas together when I was 14. I was 15, I went to California with her and her gay lover, and we spent time on the beach. I was in my bathing suit. I mean, they took pictures and pictures and pictures. Show me a picture of me with a swastika tattooed on me. Show me. I'd like to see it. The burden of proof is on the accuser. Anyway, that's my take on lying for the Lord. I'll post some pictures here. Oh, and another thing is, when my mom told me that my brother overdosed accidentally, that it wasn't suicide, I took her word for it. He died in 2002, but in 2009, I went and requested the death certificate and the police report, and it was an intentional suicide, and the details of it are very unfavorable to my parents, which is why I think they lied and said that it was an accidental overdose. He was my best friend. I love him with all of my heart. I got a big tattoo of him on my shoulder here with the scripture of John 11:21, which basically is, if Jesus was here, my brother wouldn't have died. In relationship with Lazarus and Mary and Martha, when Jesus came and, raised Lazarus from the tomb. But that was the scripture, if Jesus would have been here, my brother would not be dead. I wish he would have been in our lives more. And that's terribly sad to me. This lying for the Lord thing is a terrible thing. It disgraces the community. They disgraced my brother's, final, action in life, to take his own life, to be so dramatic, to take his own life. And they, I think they harm that honesty that he had about his death. I think they detract from his life by lying about his death, and it hurts me to know they do that. So I've been here. I made this website at justin-thompson.com, and you're more than welcome to see who my brother was from my point of view and why this is so important to me. Thanks for tuning in. This is Ryan from BehindZionCurtain.com. Peace.